Arundhati just said to me, well, we can now talk about the things that I left out. Well, I guess. What did you leave out? You know, I was sitting there listening to you and thinking, there it was. There it is.
Okay, let's go.
You don't want me to say anything nice about it. No. Okay. No. But really, what I thought I was sitting there is it was this mastery of detail, all expressed in the most poetic and beautiful way. That combination is so hard to achieve. I know this is not a lead-in to a conversation. It's a final statement. You see. But let me ask you this, Arundhati. How did you come to decide, after writing The God of Small Things, that you were not going to immediately sit down and write another novel?
Well, I would have had to decide to sit down and write another novel. In that, I've never believed in this thing of having a single profession and sort of doing the same thing all your life. It feels like your brain is growing in one direction, like some tumor. A lot of people keep saying to me that you must be under a lot of pressure from your publishers to write another book. Well, I think it's a bit dishonest to put it that way for me, because no one can pressurize me. They don't have a handle on me. It's only if I wanted to accept that pressure that it would be a pressure. And I just think that very soon after I finished writing The God of Small Things and it came out, India did, its nuclear tests, and I recognized the fact that here was the papers and lots of public people and writers and painters, and everybody was standing up and applauding this horrible act. And I realized then that staying quiet was as political an act as speaking out, and I had the space to make a statement. And if I didn't, it was something that I couldn't live with, which was when I wrote The End of Imagination. And also I think being involved in the kinds of things I've been involved in the last few years have been wonderful for me, because I've met the most extraordinary people, I've been close to the most extraordinary political happenings, and I also know that when I'm ready to write another book, if I'm ready to write, I keep saying The God of Small Things was a collaboration between me and a little bit of magic, and you have to know how to wait, It will come. If it doesn't, that's all right, but if it does, it will come. You can't just, it's not some factory product.
No one would accuse that of being a factory product.
No, I mean the next.
No, but it was interesting what you said about, that turning to the political world, from writing a novel, you encountered people. You suddenly found all these people that you could work with and do things with, and the writer who, working alone, writing a novel or a poem, doesn't experience that. And the writers who never come out of their study, or out of their agent's office, right, and get out into the struggle and turmoil of the world, they are missing something, very, very important.
I think, the truth is that I was actually always a political person. Obviously, it's not something that suddenly happens to you. So when I was studying architecture, by the time I was in 4th year, I knew that I would never practice architecture, and I had become very interested in town planning and how cities came to be the way they were, and how land use plans and architectural plans are designed to exclude most people and make them illegal, and the whole business of the citizen and the non-citizen. So in a sense, The God of Small Things is also a very political book, and I think I don't think I ever, obviously I was never the kind of person who was only in their agent's office, because I didn't have an agent. I didn't even know there were such things until I wrote The God of Small Things.
I'm sorry to have brought it up.
But you're right. I think the business of getting into the world, living your life, and then writing about what you live is what interests me, and the idea that, I live in times, and I think those times are here in America now, but they've been in India for a while, where when you write something, the worst thing that can happen to you is not a bad review. It's somehow it's injected directly into life, and you never know what's going to happen if you write a book. The God of Small Things, I was of course taken to court for corrupting public morality.
Yes.
Which I had a technical problem with, because I said at least he should have said further corrupting public morality.
But when I read about that charge against you, I immediately went back to the God of Small Things, because I wanted to see what pages there were, that were possibly corrupting public morality, and I found them. And it was wonderful. Yeah. But you said before you were always a political person. Well, not from the age of 3 or 4 or 5, but you said something about, when you were somehow finishing work at the School of Architecture, at some point you decided, no, this was not for you. So did something happen?
Actually, absurdly, it does start from the age of 3 or 4, because I lived in my mother came from this very little village in Kerala called Imanam, and she belongs to a very parochial community called the Syrian Christians, and she married a Bengali, outside the community, and then made the mistake of marrying him and then divorcing him, and came back to the village. And so we grew up sort of outside the realm of all the protections that society chose to offer its members. And so from a very young age, one was aware of the fact that you were not going to be given those protections. And you had to constantly try to understand what was going on and how to survive in this space, and how not to go under. And so my mother is very political, in not in this overt way, but I think the minute you lose the protection of this nuclear family that protects you from the world, you're on your own, and then politics is in your life. You have to ride the waves, you have to understand it.
But you were on your own as a woman, which is a special situation. Not just in India, I suppose, being a woman on your own anywhere is something to deal with, but I imagine that maybe in India there was something about that.
Yeah, it was. Though my mother and I are great mates now, when I was 17, I left home and I was on my own, being that woman, as the Supreme Court judges rightly call me. And I think you see what happens in India is that the real life is so frightening that the middle class really protects itself and really turns inwards, and it's almost blind. It's almost like they have some lenses that fall over their eyes, and they can't see. They can't see the horrors around, because that's the only way to survive in some sense. And and I think when you fall out of that cozy little nest and there's no safety net, you realize that it's not all that horrible actually, and I don't think you can ever unlearn that once you've been there, however briefly or however temporarily. You don't forget, you don't forget whatever happens to you. I keep thinking that there are people in the world who are safe and there are people in the world who are unsafe. And if you're unsafe, you always seek out the unsafe. Whatever happens to you in your life, you're always sort of taking that walk. So it was the best university, I think, to go to.
It's interesting what you say about the middle class blinding itself, protecting itself from what is happening to so much of the population. And this is so much the history of the United States, which developed perhaps the largest middle class, and because the United States has had enough wealth so it could bribe enough people in the population to create a middle class which became useful as a buffer between the very rich and that part of the population which could not even rise into the middle class, and so the middle class in the United States has always been sort of enticed by the establishment into thinking that it can rise into the upper class, and not told that it can also descend. But the result is the United States educational system teaches us from the very beginning that we're not a class society. To use the term class in the United States, it's just a term you use for school, right? This is my class, thing. And yeah, but the idea of a class society is something that has always made people in power nervous. If anybody brings up the idea of class conflict, class struggle, you mustn't talk about that. And we're brought up in the United States to believe that we're one big happy family.
And aren't you?
And it's we all have the same interest. We have the language to try to make that imprint on the American people. The language of national interest. The phrase is national interest, as assuming we all have the same interest. Exxon and I have the same interest.
Enron and I.
Enron and you. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it takes. But there's a perception that people in the United States have growing up, especially people in the working classes of the United States. They know that their interests in Exxon are not the same, and they show it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in India, it's so complicated that sometimes the longer you live there, the more confused you get. Because it's when you think of class in India, you have so many other things too. You have caste, which is a complex business because I grew up in Kerala, which had the first ever democratically elected Marxist government in the world. But all the leaders of the Marxist